Although the Mongols had been victorious at the Battle of Ngasaunggyan, they suffered such heavy losses that they were forced to retreat. The incident alarmed the Yuan court, however, and Kublai Khan ordered the Yunnan regional government to send troops after the retreating Burmese. Scrapping together a force of around 4,000 men, General Nasir ad-Din marched into Burma. They destroyed a large number of abandoned stockades and outposts and occupied the strategically important Gaunsan fort on the Irrawaddy River. However, the Mongol force was far too small to proceed further inland, and with the Burmese summer coming, Nasir chose to withdraw back in early 1278. Just before he did, Nasir received a message from the Burmese royal court, which had agreed to pay the Yuan tribute. The borderlands remained contested as the Burmese did not relinquish their claim on the region. Furthermore, with the Mongols occupied on other fronts, the Burmese reoccupied Gaunsan and Ngasaunggyan, this time building strong fortifications there and a permanent garrison. It would not be until 3 years later, in 1281, that the Yuan would turn their attention to Southeast Asia again. Kublai had mixed successes in the meantime. The Yuan had finally finished off the Chinese Song Dynasty in 1279, but Kublai's attack on Japan in 1281 had been a humiliating disaster. Although the Song Dynasty was finally gone, Kublai's attention was drawn to the lands where the Song loyalists could have fled, namely the kingdoms in Vietnam and Burma. The Khan of Khans sent missions to the Champa and Dai Viets in Vietnam and the Bagan of Burma, where he demanded tribute once again. In the case of Bagan, Narathi Hapete was to send 10 senior ministers accompanied by 1,000 Burmese knights to the emperor's court. For the Champa, Kublai even demanded the king, Indra Varman V himself, to be accompanied. With the disaster in Ngasaunggyan in mind, Narathi Hapete and the royal court considered their response very carefully. Just like with the Dai Viet and the Champa, the Burmese were not keen to the idea of submission. However, unlike in Vietnam, Bagan's position in Burma was getting significantly worse. Burmese princes and nobles, particularly in the south, grew ever more restless, with many refusing the call to arms. Despite the large number of new fortifications built on the Yuan-Bagan frontier, they were all woefully undermanned. Ultimately, though, the Burmese refused to submit. The decision was a curious one. The severity of the situation was clear to the Bagan court, even to the incompetent Narathi Hapete. The reputation and support of the Burmese crown was at an all-time low, and they had very few precious resources and manpower to fight with. That even the learned and experienced ministers, such as Anandapyasi and the wise queen Solamon, would even support this potential war is rather surprising. It is possible that the Burmese had hoped this would be another limited border war, just like before. Considering that the Mongols were concentrating larger number of troops against the Champa and Dai Viet, it is possible that the Burmese believed that the Mongols were only sent relatively small force against them, just like Nasir's expedition. Or perhaps they knew it was doomed from the start, and it was simple Burmese stubbornness to stand their ground in the face of adversity and odds. Whatever the case, Kublai made good on his words. Throughout 1282, the Mongol Imperial Command was making preparation for the invasion of Southeast Asia. We do not know the precise numbers of the invasion force, but the Mongol High Command indicated that around 60,000 men was needed for the Burmese front. For the Burmese invasion force, 10,000 men from Sichuan and 14,000 Khwarezmian Central Asians and Persians were assembled. It is unclear whether the Yuan had managed to gather the force of a total 60,000 strong. The invasion was under the command of Prince Sangudar. As for the Burmese, Bagan called the banners, but many did not answer. Around mid-1283, a Burmese army, possibly less than 20,000 strong, under General Anandapyasi and his brother Yandapyasi, was sent to the fort built at Ngasaunggyan. On the 22nd of September 1283, the Yuan launched the largest invasion of Burma yet. The Mongol armies marched down the border in 2 columns, one along the Taiping River using over 200 boats, and the other proceeded on land, all converging to Ngasaunggyan. The second battle was reported in both Burmese and Mongol records, but the tactical details are lacking, unlike the earlier battle. In fact, the details of the entire campaign is rather fuzzy, with many contradictions on both the Yuan records as well as the Burmese ones. The Burmese royal chronicles reported an extremely exaggerated figure of both sides, with the Burmese being over 400,000 strong, facing a Mongol army of over 2 million men. With the Mongols fighting on two-front war and the Burmese crown nearly bankrupt of manpower and resources, we know this is not even remotely true. However, the ratio of the figure serves to tell us how badly outnumbered and outmatched the Burmese were. We also know for sure that the Mongol army was far larger than the one in 1277, and that the Burmese could not field the same numbers either. If we were to estimate the Mongol forces with the known numbers from Sichuan and Persia, we're looking at a force that could possibly be around 30,000 strong at the very least. The Burmese figure of 400,000 likely referred to the entire country's population, as the numbers were in conjunction with the phrase 400,000 men with every fighting horse and elephant available in the Burmese version of the Mananyaswan, or the Royal Chronicles. A more reasonable figure would probably be somewhere between 10 to 20,000 strong. It is clear though that the Burmese were severely outnumbered, and their strategy was purely defensive. None of the Apatite's royal orders were recorded to have been blockade the road against the incoming Mongol warriors and fight them. Many historians remark that the Burmese decision to fight was rather suicidal and foolhardy. However, it may not necessarily be the case. If we were to combine what we know for sure from both sides, the Second Battle of Ngasaunggyan was not a single large siege, but a series of smaller sieges through overlapping Burmese defenses from Ngasaunggyan to the city of Burma. According to the Royal Chronicles, Anandapyasi and the Burmese commanders filled the area between Ngasaunggyan and Burma with stockades, moats, and ditches, with their final last stand to be at a river crossing near Burma. One wonders if it might have been better if the Burmese commanders had instead taken to the jungles and strike at the Yuan supply lines with hit-and-run tactics like the Dai Viet and Champa would do. It has to be noted that unlike in Vietnam, the Bagan court had very few local sympathizers from whom they can rely on. Much of Burma was in a state of rebellion, and the Bagan court did not know who they could trust. Given what they had to work with, the Burmese army likely chose the conventional method to hold the Mongol lines instead. Furthermore, the Burmese learned from Nasir ad-Din's expedition that the Mongols could not last long in the Burmese weather. Instead, the Burmese army likely hoped to hold the Yuan off long enough for the tropical weather to weaken them, then force them back with a counterattack. Likewise, the Yuan, having gained some experience with tropical weather in Southeast Asia, were determined to break the Burmese before summer and monsoon could arrive. Prince Sangudar wasted no time and attacked the Burmese fortifications. Beneath their horsehair banners, Mongols, Turks, Persians, and Chinese soldiers of the Yuan army advanced towards the Bagan lines. Just as they neared, Sangudar's warriors began to slow down as the ground gave before them. The Burmese ditches and moats prevented the Yuan from utilizing their elite cavalry, and behind their walls, the Burmese soldiers were safe from the deadly Mongol volleys. They would wait until the Yuan warriors would come close enough within sword range, then cut them down, one by one. Despite the relentless attacks, the Yuan forces suffered heavy losses and were beaten back time and time again until the Mongols were forced to lay siege. Encouraged by these successes, the Burmese took heart, wondering if the fortunes of the Bagan dynasty had finally turned. But it was not to be. The Burmese strategy did not take into account the determination of the Mongols and of Kublai Khan. Had this been the case in 1277, where the Yuan were only concerned with the Sino-Burmese borders, then perhaps it would have been enough. But now it was 1283. The Yuan had suffered two major defeats against the Japanese, and the invasion of Vietnam was not going well, and thus Kublai and the Yuan were adamant securing a victory anywhere. Despite the heavy losses, Prince Sangudar intensified the attacks. Chinese-built siege weapons hurled stones, arrows, and incendiaries at the Burmese lines, even as thousands of Yuan warriors attacked again and again despite the heavy casualties, and would continue to do so for over 2 months. The Burmese position slowly grew desperate and were pushed back from their layered defenses in Ngasaunggyan until they were finally trapped at the final stockade of Burma near the river. The Royal Chronicles described it as if it was fighting an endless horde of enemies. For 3 months, the Burmese slew the enemy, spared not even the feeders of elephants and horses, but slew them all. But when 10 myriad of men were dead, the Mongols sent 20 more, and so much that the king's men were weary and fordone, and as soon as the Mongols had crossed the river, it was over. it was a disastrous defeat for the Bagan army. A number of senior commanders were killed. General Anandapyasi pulled back what remained of his forces to Khaontsin, but the Mongol army arrived before they could prepare its defenses, and that fort too fell within just 6 days, on the 9th of December. According to the Mongol sources, the Burmese lost some 10,000 men at Khaontsin, but this figure is likely combined with those lost from Ngasaunggyan and Burma. Sangudar continued to push downwards. They took the ancient Pew city of Dagon on the 5th of February 1284, which was only 400 kilometers north of Bagan. However, the Burmese summer finally arrived, and the Mongols found the heat of the searing Irrawaddy Valley excessive, and Sangudar was forced to retreat before his men could be weakened. The Burmese followed up and retook Dagon on the 10th of May, but the Mongols did not return to Yunnan and instead waited in the cooler regions of Burma. The Burmese desperately rebuilt their defenses, but the defeat at Ngasaunggyan had completely broken the army, and without the support of their vessels, they could not replenish their numbers. The Mongols returned to Dagon once the monsoon was over, and although the Bagan garrisons continued to resist, Sangudar's army steamrolled all over them until they were just 270 kilometers from Bagan. Upon hearing the news, Narat the Apatite panicked and fled the capital for the south. It proved to be premature, as the Mongol army was in no condition to attack the capital, and Kublai had no orders to take Bagan itself. The only thing the king got in the end was the nickname Tayo Piemin, or the king who ran away from the Chinese, and what little respect he had left from the kingdom. Narat the Apatite's sons ruled key ports in Lower Burma, but the increasingly paranoid king trusted none of them. The sight of the king and his small army of guards wandering down southern Burma like an aimless animal threw the country into chaos. It was during this time a Mon commoner led a revolt in Motama. The Mon-speaking city of Bago too joined the revolt, and soon nearly the eastern part of Lower Burma was in a state of rebellion. Surrounded by treacherous princes and rebels, Narat the Apatite finally gave in and asked the Mongols for terms. The Yuan commanders, who had organized northern Burma as an imperial protectorate of Zhengmin, agreed to the ceasefire given the amount of lands they had to consolidate and the hostilities of the Burmese locals, but they demanded that the king gave full submission to the Khan of Khans. Even at this point, the king remained stubborn, and it was only at the advice of his queen that he agreed to submit on the condition that the Mongols withdraw their armies. In June 1268, he sent an embassy under Shinditapa Maukha, a learned monarch and patron of the modern Burmese diplomatic corps, to the emperor's court in Kanblai. The embassy arrived in January 1287 and was received by Kublai himself. The delegation formally acknowledged the Mongol rule over Bagan and agreed to pay the annual tribute in exchange for the withdrawal of Yuan forces. Kublai happily accepted the submission. His other campaigns had proven disastrous, and he needed the Burmese campaign to be recorded as a victory. Furthermore, despite their successes, the Burmese capital was still standing and the garrisons remained defiant. The Khan of Khans would rather have a vassal ruler and let the locals sort out the issue by themselves. With the matter settled and his throne secured, Narat the Apatite confidently chose to return to Bagan, despite the fact that most of the king hated him and the decision to submit to the Mongols. His queen, Solamon, advised he raise a small army before he reached Bagan to show his strength and avoid the territories of his sons, particularly Prince Theodu of Pi. Thinking the crisis was over, he ignored her advice on both matters and chose to march through Pi itself. Prince Theodu's men promptly seized the party. According to legend, the prince offered his father death either by the sword or from the poisoned meal from the 300 dishes he liked so much. Narat the Apatite weepingly asked his queen for one last final advice, who told him to take the poison so that at least he could enjoy his last meal. The king ate his poisoned meal, sobbing as he did. Narat the Apatite, considered to be brutal as an ogre but cowardly in the face of true danger, died a pitiful death. And with his death, those vassals that remained loyal to the Bagan throne up until now broke away. The Bagan Empire was no more.